It is February 1945. At a 3rd Army water supply depot near Trier, Germany, winter exhaust fills the air. Exhausted American soldiers line up with metal canteens. They drink deeply to wash down dry field rations. The water flows from a heavy iron pipe connected to a local well. Everything looks routine. Then, the line breaks. A corporal drops to his knees in the mud. He grips his stomach and vomits violently. Within minutes, 5 more men collapse beside him. Their skin turns gray. Their bodies convulse with sudden, unnatural agony. A silent killer is flowing through the pipes of the 3rd Army. An invisible enemy strikes hundreds of men without firing a single bullet. But General George Patton will soon turn this hidden battlefield upside down, proving that a drop of poison can lead straight to a final public reckoning. This is the story of what happened when a German saboteur poisoned a 3rd Army water supply with lethal arsenic, and a sharp medical officer caught the invisible chemical signature before it was too late. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We dedicate ourselves to telling the forgotten World War II stories that show how the right question kills the wrong cover. Captain Maria Lopez was 30 years old, from El Paso, Texas. Serving as a medical officer in the 3rd Army Medical Corps, she had trained at Tulane Medical School, specializing in infectious disease and rare chemical toxicology. Before the war, her younger brother had died from a sudden waterborne illness back home, a painful loss that drove her to master the science of public health and microscopic killers. Over 2 years in uniform, she had seen the brutal filth of the European theater, treating dysentery, battlefield rot, and infected wounds across France. She was a quiet, clinical professional who trusted cold laboratory data over human guesswork. Now, she stood over a makeshift workbench inside a freezing canvas tent at the supply depot, staring at a glass vial of local well water that refused to match any standard bacterial pathogen. Hans Becker was 47 years old, working as a local civilian maintenance plumber in Trier, Germany. In reality, he was a highly trained Abwehr sabotage operative who had mastered chemical warfare at a secret military intelligence academy back in 1942. He held a deep, unyielding belief that the Allied advance was a plague that must be eradicated through total, invisible destruction. To him, an invading soldier without clean water was just a helpless corpse waiting for a shallow grave. He walked the American supply base with absolute confidence, carrying a freshly stamped denazification clearance that allowed him to bypass armed guards without a second glance. For 2 years, he had slipped lethal industrial compounds into Allied fuel dumps, food stores, and water supplies across the Western Front, secretly claiming more than 1,400 casualties. He considered himself an untouchable ghost of the Reich, and his escape route out of Trier was already mapped. In February 1945, the Allied war machine was tearing through the western border of the German Reich. The ancient city of Trier had fallen, but the rapid advance brought massive logistical chaos. Frontline combat units pushed deep into enemy territory faster than rearguard units could secure the newly occupied zones. German infrastructure was completely ruined. Water mains were shattered by artillery, power grids were dead, and local municipal governments had vanished into thin air. To keep thousands of forward soldiers fighting, the American military had to rely on existing German facilities and local civilian workers who knew how to run them. This frantic pace created dangerous security gaps across the entire theater. The Army desperately needed plumbers, mechanics, and engineers to handle the daily maintenance of municipal networks. American administrative clerks rushed through the mandatory denazification paperwork, signing official clearance forms for thousands of local civilians after only a few brief questions. If a local man knew how to fix a high-pressure valve or locate a buried water junction, he received an identification badge. Other sector commanders let these administrative shortcuts slide, because their top priority was keeping the water flowing to the front lines. They tested the water for basic mud and common battlefield bacteria, but they never looked for chemical sabotage. They foolishly assumed a defeated population would simply comply with the occupation. That assumption was a fatal mistake. The rapid advance left the 3rd Army vulnerable to a hidden enemy operating right under their noses. Back inside the freezing canvas tent at the Trier depot, the true nature of the well water was finally about to be exposed. Major Eleanor Stone sat across from the German plumber in the damp ink basement of the Trier headquarters. She placed a copy of the water laboratory report on the wooden table between them. Why is your signature on the maintenance log for the fenced well enclosure just 3 hours before the first soldiers collapsed? She asked. I am only a simple civilian technician following standard operating procedures to clear a clogged intake valve near the main pump station, Becker said. A routine clearing does not require opening the secondary chemical treatment line or staying inside the high-security perimeter. For 45 minutes, Stone answered. American regulations are entirely meaningless to a man who actually understands the complex municipal layout of the Rhineland better than anyone else, he said. You are required by strict Third Army Security Regulation 42 to account for every single minute spent near our vital water resources, she said. Your amateur frontline soldiers can barely read a basic engineering blueprint, let alone judge the daily work of a professional German craftsman. He answered. The military laboratory in Luxembourg found a highly concentrated compound of industrial arsenic and a specific organic catalyst inside the well water, Stone said. Naive Americans honestly believe a piece of paper called a denazification clearance can change the fundamental reality of who truly owns this sacred soil, he said. This lethal chemical mixture requires specialized toxicology knowledge that a common house plumber in this town simply does not possess, she answered. You're uncultured. Mixed-race troops are weak, soft, and completely vulnerable to the superior scientific intellect of the German Reich, he said. You are openly admitting to targeting hundreds of innocent military personnel with deliberate chemical sabotage, she said. I have spent 2 long years successfully washing away the enemy across the entire Western Theater, causing over 1,400 casualties in fuel dumps and food stores without ever being suspected by your foolish, lazy border clerks. He answered. The Army will uncover your entire network and every contact you have hidden in this sector, she said. No amount of cross-examination will ever change the absolute fact that German science will always find a way to destroy the arrogant invaders from within their own camps, he said. We have heavily armed guards stationed at every single exit of this facility, she answered. My final escape route out of Trier is already secured, and your primitive guards are far too stupid to stop a true undercover operative of the Abwehr, he said. Stone closed her leather folder and stood up from the wooden chair. She walked out of the cold interrogation room without another word. She immediately picked up the secure field telephone to alert the highest levels of Third Army Command. The urgent report reached Patton within the hour. Patton's jeep pulled up to the gate of the Trier facility. The general walked into the interrogation room completely unannounced, wearing his immaculate winter uniform with 4 silver stars gleaming on his helmet. His iconic ivory-handled revolvers rested flat against his hips. Every officer in the room instantly snapped to attention, frozen by his cold, silent glare. Patton studied the prisoner for a long moment, then he spoke, his voice quiet but sharp. Did you mix the chemical agent into the central well pump yesterday morning? Patton asked. I performed my assigned mechanical duties to ensure the proper flow of municipal water, Becker said. Did you use industrial arsenic to purposefully poison 250 American soldiers? Patton asked. I used the available methods of warfare to clean the sector of foreign invaders, Becker said. Did you believe your forged denazification clearance made you entirely invisible to my command? Patton asked. I knew your lazy border clerks would never look closely at a skilled German technician, Becker answered. Patton did not blink. He stepped closer to the table, his eyes locked onto the saboteur. You believe you are a superior operative executing a masterful strategy for a glorious Reich. The plain truth is that your empire is completely shattered, your armies are retreating in absolute ruin, and you are nothing but a common criminal hiding inside a water pipe. You bragged that your chemical knowledge would easily slaughter 800 unsuspecting men. But a single 30-year-old American medical officer from Texas named Captain Lopez completely dismantled your entire operation with a few glass test tubes and a microscope. She proved that American scientific expertise is far superior to your desperate cowardice. You bragged that your secret underground contacts would quickly secure your escape route east. But Major Stone tracked your movements, watched your secret courier meeting, and arrested your accomplices before you could even pack your bags. Your entire spy ring is destroyed. Now, your war is entirely over. You have 2 options. you will immediately sit down and write a complete, detailed list of every single poison dump and saboteur contact remaining in this Western theater. If you refuse, I will personally ensure you are handed over to a military tribunal as a brutal war criminal. And you will swing from an American gallows. Decide right now." Becker stared at the polished floor, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. He slowly reached for the fountain pen on the table. Major Stone carried out the operation with absolute precision. Within 48 hours, military intelligence teams surrounded Becker's quarters near the village. Becker watched through a cracked window as heavily armed military police kicked down his front door, the sharp smell of cordite and wet mud filling the small room. He tried to reach for a hidden pistol, but two large sergeants instantly slammed him face first onto the wooden floorboards, pinning his arms behind his back. Outside, his courier contact, Frau Clara Mueller, was seized without a single shot, her leather dispatch bag snatched from her grip. Local German civilians stood along the cobblestone street, watching in stunned silence as the once confident plumber was dragged out in handcuffs, his face covered in dirt. At the same time, the base water supply was publicly locked down with heavy steel chains. Huge American engineering trucks rolled into the depot, deploying portable filtration units to pump clean, safe water for the troops. Inside the medical tents, the 256 soldiers received immediate chelation therapy. The men watched from their cots as Becker was marched past the open tent flaps, straight toward a dark, heavily guarded cell. Completely stripped of his unearned authority, Captain Maria Lopez received the Bronze Star and returned to Tulane University, becoming a faculty member who specialized in toxicology and water safety. She developed advanced military water testing protocols that were officially adopted in 1948 and remain in use across American installations in 2026. Major Eleanor Stone continued her career as a senior counterintelligence officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, corresponding with Lopez for decades. In 1962, Lopez sent a letter to her friend stating that she tested the water while Stone found the man who poisoned it, saving 800 men together. Stone wrote back that they simply did their jobs, and those 800 living men were the only thank you that mattered. Hans Becker was tried at a military war crimes tribunal, where his chemical sabotage operations were presented as evidence. He was convicted of war crimes and hanged in 1946. Frau Clara Mueller was sentenced to 8 years, serving 5 before her release in 1950. She returned to Trier to work as a school librarian for 30 years, living quietly and remorsefully until her death in 1985. General Patton never spoke about the sabotage publicly, keeping the investigation report locked inside his personal desk. He noted in a private letter that the enemy thought he could kill hundreds of men through a single water supply, but quiet expertise defeated him. He wrote that the math is always on our side because we believe in genuine expertise. Some historians have argued that the rapid Allied advance and the desperate reliance on unvetted, local civilian labor showed a reckless disregard for basic security protocols, needlessly exposing thousands of frontline soldiers to preventable sabotage. Others have argued the opposite, maintaining that in the chaotic final months of the European war, logistical speed was the absolute highest priority, and that the swift detection of the operative proved the ultimate resilience of American military specialization. What is certain is that the emergency water safety testing protocols developed during this specific crisis were officially integrated into Army regulations, establishing the foundational chemical defense frameworks still used today. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have ordered the same swift execution, or would you have chosen a softer military trial? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about how the right question kills the wrong cover, make sure to subscribe.